This presentation is on the Charles Darwin from the time of his voyage through his development of the theory of natural selection. Aboard the HMS Beagle, the emergency ship Beagle, again, we talked about his earlier years, his schooling and development. At age 22, he graduated college with a degree in divinity and accompanied the Beagle on a scientific voyage of exploration as an unpaid naturalist. The Beagle explored the oceans off the Pacific coast of South America and the islands, and looking for ports and basically places for the Royal Navy to be able to put in to safe ports, safe coves, and get fresh water and animals and meat as they moved around the world. As a naturalist, Darwin was to observe geological formations, fossils, living organisms on the continents and islands along the way. The flora, the plants, and the fauna, the animals. The ship would stop and explore coves and ports, and Darwin would go and look for plant and animal life. He observed and was very impressed with the effects of natural forces on the earth, volcanoes, earthquakes. A lot of that tectonic activity was going along the coast of South America. And he observed the earth was constantly changing. The Galapagos Islands, about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador, they stopped there, and there were many islands, and he observed these tortoises, mockingbirds, finches, aquatic iguanas, which occur nowhere else in the world. Each island supported its own form, slightly different version, because each island had a slightly different environment. And they were closely related yet different from island to island. And he also made the link that some of these animals were closely related but becoming more different than some of the similar species from the continent. Some of the influences on Darwin: he developed his ideas of changeability while on the voyage. He was influenced greatly by Thomas Malthus, a British economist who argued that human populations remained in balance with the food supply. If there's more food, the population would go up. Less, you'd have wars or famine or pestilence, and they would die down. If true for humans, why not for animal populations as well? It's also important to remember at this time, this was a long voyage, and Darwin had no duties while the ship was at sea. So he had abundant time to sit and think and ponder and speculate and read and look over his observations, and he saw that they did not fit the strict interpretation of the Bible. The Bible could not explain the things he was observing. Upon returning to England in 1836, he began recording and his observations, writing, organizing them slowly over time. He developed his theory of evolution 22 years after returning from the Galapagos. It was in the process of being refined all the way along the way. One of the things, he also studied the theory of artificial selection, a selection that humans have been doing for thousands of years, trying to get better cattle, better horses, all the breeds of dogs that there are, that really a dog is just a descendant of a wolf, but through special artificial selective breeding, we get Chihuahuas and Great Danes. So Darwin thought about that and learned about that. Again, Malthus and Darwin. Malthus was of great influence. He believed that a population of food supply influenced the population or the availability. And then Darwin believed that each subsequent generation would have favorable variations influenced by their surroundings. And if they didn't have these favorable variations, they would slowly start to die out. And the ones with the more favorable variation would be more successful, little by little, extremely slowly over vast amounts of time. The population of this species would start to change. And if it changed enough, it would technically be a different species because it couldn't interbreed with the original species. The theory of natural selection, that there's a force in nature that works similar to artificial selection. Artificial selection is the farmer says, this is my best cow, I'm going to keep it and breed it. These are my other cows, I'm going to eat them. That's pretty severe as a composed to natural selection, where it's an extremely slow process over time. In a population over 10 years, a subgroup with a favorable trait, a little bit faster, a little bit longer neck, a little bit longer tongue to reach leaves, whatever, would only have a few more offspring, one or two more offspring in a decade. But that's enough to, over thousands and thousands of years, to start to shift that population in one direction or another. Understanding that the earth is changing, but it's also changing very, very slowly. Darwin's theory was that natural selection was the mechanism for the population to change, certain variations to survive and reproduce and pass on to the next generation. The need for these changes were driven by the ever-changing earth. Darwin delayed releasing his theory for 22 years. He knew it would be controversial, and he was not really looking to stir up the controversy pot. He had some members of his family that were religious. Remember, he graduated with a degree in theology. He was going to be a minister. He just didn't really have the knack for it. But finally his friends urged him to publish his findings, as another researcher, Wallace, had come up with the exact same theory studying animals on the island of Madagascar off the coast of Africa. And if Darwin didn't publish, then this gentleman, Wallace, would get all the credit for it. Darwin had a lot of prestige at the time and could have published without Wallace. He was older and more famous. But he thought both sets of information would give a stronger case for his theory, so they published together and presented their theory together. But as Darwin had come up with the idea first, it became Darwin's theory of evolution, not Wallace's theory of evolution, over time. Reactions to his theory: some biologists argued that Darwin could not prove his hypothesis, but since his time, we have seen examples of evolution in work many times. Others criticized Darwin's concept of variation. They looked at a bunch of rabbits and they all looked alike. But if one really studies a population, you can see that there's a vast amount of variation in the population. Researchers many times studying monkeys, studying apes, studying rabbits, studying whales will give them names and they can tell them apart. Religious opponents, of course, argued that creation was the beginning of all life. Other concepts by Darwin felt that all related organisms are descended from common ancestors. And Darwin believed that the earth is not static, but always evolving, always changing. Islands come up, mountain ranges wear away, continents the plates are shifting around, and the earth is always changing. In the later years, Darwin was independently wealthy and really never had to earn an income, so he had time to sit around in his study and ponder and write books and so on. He and his wife Emma Wedgwood had 10 children, and Darwin spent the rest of his life expanding different aspects raised earlier from his works. One of the things that made Darwin more famous than Wallace was he published some books for the common man, written for the common man, not in scientific terms, but in terms that the common person could understand. And then people read these and understood his idea more quickly. The Origin of Species by Natural Selection and The Descent of Man were two of the big ones that people read. Variation of Plants and Animals Under Domestication has to do with artificial selection, and the expression and motion of man and animals. Darwin was elected to the Royal Society in Great Britain. It's the highest scientific honor one can earn in Great Britain, in 1839. In 1878, he was elected to the French Academy of Sciences. Again, highest scientific honor one can earn in France, and he was not a native French person, but they felt his theory was important enough that they would honor him. He was buried in Westminster Abbey in 1882. Being buried in Westminster Abbey is one of the highest honors you can give to a scientist.